Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and with me today to talk about her role in DE&I efforts is Kary James, VP of Equity and Inclusion for Public Sector at ICF. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kary.
Thank you for the invitation to join you.
Of course. So tell us a bit about your role as VP of Equity and Inclusion for Public Sector. What does that entail, and why is it unique to this industry?
Sure. Well, first, it is one of the only roles that I'm aware of, at least today, in the consulting business that has a completely client-facing focus. So what that means, in my title, you noted that it is Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, not DEI or DEIA. That was intentional. Over at ICF, we do have a Vice President for DE&I. My partner in crime and good friend and colleague. However, that work is really focused on our internal workforce from a traditional HR perspective. My background is in systems improvement and capacity building and technical assistance. And over the past 20 plus, 25 years, it's always odd to still say numbers like that. One of the things that has been a significant part of my work is how we build equity into the type of services and technical assistance we provide to our clients. This was missing in terms of our work in public sector for our client-facing work. How are we ensuring that our business practices are embedding approaches that, we can't cover everything, but we're intentional. We're thinking about the strategies. We're thinking about the solutions. We're thinking about the unintended consequences. We're thinking about how we build diverse teams that are able to bring those diverse lens and inclusive practices. So when we bring a team together to respond to an opportunity or to implement work on behalf of our clients, we are intentionally bringing the best of what ICF has to give with a lens of equity and with inclusive practices. And that's my role in working with our domain and subject matter experts and our technical experts to think about all of those business practices, to think about those solutions, and to make sure that we are being intentional and accountable for the way that we're doing our work.
Awesome. Yeah, the client-facing portion does seem unique to this industry. And I do want to circle back to that in just a minute. But considering it is February, we are speaking in February, I just wanted to ask if there's any initiatives or anything underway for Black History Month, if ICF is recognizing and observing the month in any way.
Absolutely. In addition to my role as Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, I also have the amazing privilege of serving as the chair of the Black Employee Community Network since its inception, which I believe we're now into our third full year of our employee resource groups. And this month, like many others, we are flooding the airways with historical facts, with information on our clients, our domain experts, our technology experts across the organization. We kicked off our Black History Month with a amazing virtual opportunity that brought together some of our staff in our headquarters area in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, as well as virtually across the globe with a moment of silence. Sadly, this month we entered into yet another note of another life lost, horrifically and unfortunately. And we wanted to pay honor to Tyree Nichols and the loss of his life tragically. But these are the types of things that our work, both personally and professionally across the Employee Community Network, intends to have impact. And ultimately, hopefully one day, those types of moment of silence and those types of newscasts will be a memory. But we bring together opportunities for learning, for cross-sharing, historical facts, and really just a celebration. While Black History Month is 29 days in February, we like to remind people that Black history is American history. It's all of our history. And so the awareness of the contributions, the sacrifices of Black Americans in this country, both past, present, and the young people that are going to do amazing things as they walk into their leadership. We should be celebrating that all year round.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that, Kary. I really appreciate it. So how do all of these DE&I efforts engage your internal workforce and, as you alluded to, expand to actually engaging with federal agencies?
Um, it has to be a partnership. We are, I spoke a little bit about my background in capacity building and the work that we do across our employee community networks, as well as the learning, development, communities of practices around building our capacity. How are we building the capacity for our workforce to have the language, have the skills, have a culture that allows for the type of discussions that need to happen when we need to look at equity impact assessments. All of these things combined is what hopefully, and this is work we are starting, right? So it will be lag data. It's not like you do one thing today and then everything is fixed tomorrow. But the idea here is that ultimately we are moving on strategies that are not just approaching intended to impact the technical challenges that come with the work of embedding equity, inclusive practices, building a diverse workforce, also the adaptive challenges that are really around the culture building. How do you build the capacity? In some ways, if hearts and minds need to be changed, but also comfort, psychological safety. And these are all things that we do in partnership with our HR and our corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion team, as well as our domain experts and those of us that are client facing in the workforce. The idea is that our staff, no matter who they are, will all ultimately have the capacity and skill sets to be responsive to client needs with an equity lens and with inclusive practices, and will recognize the need to have diverse perspectives at the table ongoing, not just for those work efforts that are slated only for DEIA or justice initiatives, but for all of our initiatives. So I work with our solution architects. I work with our domain experts. We are talking about the gamut of all of our work, how we are building our teams to do that work with an equity lens.
So what are some of the biggest asks from federal agencies around creating more equitable and inclusive experiences?
It's quite frankly all over the place still today. One of our huge wins, I'm sure you all noted last week, President Biden and his administration outlined a updated executive order. The initial executive order that he put out at the beginning of his administration for advancing racial equity and equity broadly, although that particular EO does specifically state to advancing racial equity, which is important. But he's doubled down on that. And so in the first couple of years of his administration, federal agencies were organizing to develop equity plans, right? To take a look at their organizations and identify where their strengths were, where their challenges were, and where their opportunities. And I think that that's been all over the place. We've seen federal agencies take a lens of impacting procurement opportunities. So with that, really putting in strong requirements for engaging in small businesses, particularly small businesses that might be minority-owned or women-owned organizations. So looking at how the dollars are going to make sure there's more equity in access to funding, but also looking at their own workforce, right? Their hiring practices, so a bit of internal and external. And then for those that are ultimately, responsible for impacting populations, like the work that HHS and ACF are doing, looking at the types of technical assistance and capacity building that's being offered. All of this is about, in some ways, a parallel role to what we're doing at ICF. It's not just about the traditional HR work. It's also retraining and building a culture that is thinking about the work. When you're on the ground working with a state, a jurisdiction, when you're advising practitioners on the ground, how are we doing that with a lens of equity? How are we building the language to recognize that we need community membership at the table? We need the folks that are going to be most impacted to inform those solutions. And in some ways, those are very different practices than the ones that we've done historically. I think the additional requirements that the new executive order will have, which is we don't just need a plan. Now we're tracking, right? Now we're measuring. Now you're going to be reporting out on. You've got your plans in place. This is all additional information. And again, these are their lag data, right? So, what we do today, we might not see the full benefit of that until a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, but we're seeing the requirement to be intentional and to be accountable, and those are important. And I do think that that's a space for us at ICF as we contribute to thought partnership and thought leadership, and even the way that our colleagues who are supporting our federal agencies are supporting the mission and implementing efforts. This will all come together eventually in what I believe will be an amazingly impactful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kary, before we close, you've mentioned lots of practices and initiatives that are underway, but is there anything else, anything in the works or coming up that you'd like to share under your efforts?
I've got to be honest, I'm really excited about our DEI lens, our equity management framework that we are now testing with, as I mentioned before, our solution architects and our domain experts. And this is going to really give us some great data around if we are taking the time to be intentional at design, solutioning, and implementation, and each of the stages where decisions are being made, to train ourselves to think about the impact of equity and assess that at each stage. I'm excited to see what the results are. If our hypothesis is correct, then we just might have something there. So I hope in the next 6 months or 8 months, we'll have some new data to report back, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about what we're seeing that's had positive impact in that way.
Yeah, that would be great. We look forward to that as well.
Thank you.
Well, Kary, thank you so much for being here and sharing more about your role and your efforts with us today. This is truly such an important topic and part of our industry. So I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your time.